My name is Talia Miller, and for the first time in my life, I thought I was finally safe. 12 years of exhaustion, skipped holidays, and instant noodles had led me here, to the moment I signed the papers for my first home, a quiet yellow house in Silver Canyon Estates, just outside Austin, Texas. The agent slid the keys across the table, and my hands trembled as I picked them up. That sound, the metal clinking against my palm, felt like freedom, like proof that all the sacrifices had meant something. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing it in, the silence, the relief, the weight of a dream finally real. And yet, there was a quiet ache underneath it all, a question I had learned not to ask out loud. Would anyone in my family ever be proud of me? If you've ever been called too independent or made to feel guilty for succeeding on your own, this story might sound familiar. Because what came next, the phone calls, the guilt, the lawsuit, would force me to question what family really means. Before I tell you how my own parents tried to take my house from me, like this video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because this isn't just about money, it's about control, and what happens when love turns into leverage. That night, I stood by the window of my apartment, watching the lights of downtown Austin shimmer like promises I had built myself. I was 29, proud but uneasy, because deep down, I knew peace never lasted long in my family. And I was right. The next morning, my mother called. When my phone lit up that morning with my mother's name, I already knew peace had an expiration date. It had always been that way. Even as a kid, I learned that my achievements were invisible unless they made Brianna look better. When I brought home straight A's, Mom would say, "Your sister's more creative, though." When I bought my first used car at 19, Dad said, "You should help Brianna learn responsibility." Every victory came with a shadow attached, her name. So when I saw Mom glowing on my screen, I already felt my stomach tighten. I answered anyway. "Talia, your father and I need to talk to you," she said, her tone clipped, formal, the voice she used when she wanted control. "Can you come by the house tonight?" I shifted the phone to my other hand, glancing at the half-packed boxes in my living room. "I'm actually moving today, remember? I told you last month." A pause. The kind of silence that said she hadn't listened the first time. "So, you went through with that," she replied finally. "Talia, we discussed this. You should have waited." We hadn't discussed anything. She had decided, and for years I'd been the daughter who nodded and obeyed. But this time, something inside me didn't bend. "Mom, I've been saving for this house for years. The timing was right." Her sigh came sharp and cold. "Your sister needs support right now. She's going through a difficult transition." Brianna was always going through a difficult transition. Just another crisis for the family to revolve around. "I'll call you later, okay?" I said, and hung up before she could protest. I stood there for a long moment, phone still in hand, feeling that familiar guilt crawl up my throat. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, like her disappointment had slipped through the line and settled in the air. By noon, I was hauling the last boxes into the rented moving truck. My friend Sophie Grant showed up with 2 coffees, hair pulled back, that calm look of someone who understood family chaos too well. "Your parents helping?" she asked softly, handing me a cup. "Didn't ask them," I said. Sophie nodded slowly. "Good," she murmured. "Some help costs too much." By the time the sun dipped behind the skyline, the truck was packed, the apartment empty, and my body humming with a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. I followed behind the moving van through the fading light of Austin, passing neighborhoods that felt like different versions of the life I'd never had. The one where parents showed up, where help didn't come with strings. When I turned into Silver Canyon Estates, the street lamps were just flickering on. My new house, pale yellow with dark brown trim, stood quiet under a pink sky, like it had been waiting for me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and dust. Empty rooms echoed as I walked through them, every sound new, unfamiliar, mine. I whispered to no one. I did it. The words caught in my throat. After years of being told I had too much pride, too much control, too much of everything, this was the proof that too much had kept me alive. Sophie helped me unload the boxes. We took turns unwrapping dishes and laughing about how adulthood was just carrying boxes from one quiet disappointment to another. When she left, she hugged me tighter than usual. "Text me when you wake up tomorrow," she said. "I just want to know you're okay." I promised I would. And after she drove off, I stood in the middle of the living room, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of settling wood, and realized I'd never heard silence that loud before. I spread out an air mattress in the master bedroom and lay staring at the ceiling fan turning above me, slow and steady. Every click of the blade felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that I had built this, alone, without their money, without their permission. But as I drifted toward sleep, my phone buzzed again on the nightstand. The screen glowed in the dark, Mom lighting up the room like a warning. And just like that, peace slipped quietly out the door. That night, I barely slept. Mom's voice kept replaying in my head, calm, practiced, the kind of tone she used when she'd already decided something for me. By morning, the Texas sky was pale and heavy, the kind that promised heat later and trouble sooner. I drove toward Westlake Heights with the deed folder sitting on the passenger seat, the paper still smelling like fresh ink and freedom. Halfway there, I almost turned back, but part of me wanted to face it, to see how far they'd go this time. The closer I got, the quieter it felt inside the car. Even the GPS voice seemed hesitant, like it didn't want to give me the directions. When the gates of Westlake Heights opened, I felt that old tightening in my chest, the one I used to get as a teenager whenever I walked through their front door, knowing I'd have to explain myself. Some places don't change. They just wait for you to forget how small they make you feel. Then their house appeared, perfect, polished, and suffocating. The kind of place where even the air seemed rehearsed. My mother opened the door before I could knock, her perfume hitting me like memory. Sharp, expensive, and impossible to breathe in for too long. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. My father sat in his leather recliner, tablet in hand, glasses perched low on his nose, the picture of calm authority. Brianna was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, smirking like she already knew the ending of a story I hadn't started. "Sit down, Talia," Mom said, gesturing to the love seat. "We need to talk about your new purchase." My stomach tightened. "My house? What about it?" Dad set down his tablet. "Your mother and I feel you made this purchase without proper consideration for the family's needs." "The family's needs?" I repeated. Mom folded her hands. "You have 3 bedrooms, honey. That's far too much space for one person. Brianna's been looking for somewhere affordable to live, and we think your house would be perfect." I stared at her. I thought she was joking. "You want her to live in my house?" Dad cleared his throat, smoothing his voice like a salesman. "You could share. She'll pay you $400 a month. It's a fair arrangement." A laugh escaped me. Sharp, wrong, uncontrollable. 400? My mortgage is 1,800, not counting utilities. "You've always been good with money," Mom said softly, the words slicing under their sweetness. "You can cover the rest. Consider it an investment in your sister's future." Something in me went still. That quiet kind of anger that doesn't shout. It sharpens. "I worked 12 years for that house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. 12 years. 2 jobs. Every bill, every dollar saved. Alone. "And you want me to hand it to her?" Brianna finally looked up, eyes cold. "See? This is why nobody likes helping you. You think you're better than us because you like being miserable." Her words hung in the air like smoke, toxic, familiar. And just like that, I felt every year of silence catch fire inside me. For a long moment, no one said anything. The air felt heavy, thick with perfume, resentment, and the kind of silence that dared you to fill it. Then Mom leaned forward, folding her hands like a school principal about to deliver a sentence. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "Brianna will move into your house. She'll pay you $400 a month, which is generous given the family circumstances." I stared at her, disbelief scraping at the back of my throat. $400? The mortgage is $1,800, plus insurance, plus property taxes. Dad's tone turned final, the way it always did when he wanted to end a discussion. "Then you'll cover the rest, Talia. That's what family does. We support each other." Something inside me broke. Not loudly, not like glass, but quietly, like a thread that had been pulled too long. I could feel my pulse in my fingers. "No," I said. Dad blinked, as if the word didn't fit in his version of me. "What did you say?" I said no. Brianna isn't moving into my house. Not for 400. Not for any amount. Mom's expression hardened. "You're being incredibly selfish after everything we've done for you." My voice shook, but I didn't care. "Everything you've done for me? You mean the lectures about how I should be more like her? The birthdays you forgot because she needed a new apartment? Tell me, Mom, exactly what did you do for me besides remind me how much easier I made your life by not needing anything?" She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For once, I had taken the script and rewritten it. Brianna stood, eyes blazing. "Keep your stupid house, Talia. I hope you're happy being alone." Her voice cracked, but she turned it into anger, storming out the door. The sound of her car engine faded down the street, leaving behind a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Dad stared at me with that cold, disappointed look I'd spent half my life trying to erase. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe," I replied quietly. "But at least it's mine." I walked out without another word. The late afternoon sun hit my face as I stepped onto the driveway, and for the first time, I didn't look back. The gate of Westlake Heights closed behind me with a soft click, like the world itself agreeing that enough was enough. For a week my life went quiet, too quiet. No calls, no messages, no sudden knocks on the door. Just the soft rhythm of a house learning my footsteps, the creak of wood adjusting to a new heartbeat. I worked, slept, unpacked, and told myself that silence meant peace. On the 8th morning, I opened my laptop to check emails before work. The first subject line froze me. "Notice of civil complaint, Travis County Civil Court." At first I thought it was spam, then I saw the names. Plaintiffs, Richard Miller Sr. and Margaret Miller. Defendant, Talia Miller. My breath caught. I read it 3 times, but the words didn't change. My own parents had filed a lawsuit against me, claiming an implied contract of parental reimbursement. 20 years of food, shelter, and care, they said, entitled them to financial compensation. The document used phrases like failure to provide reciprocal support and familial obligation neglected. It didn't even sound human. The coffee on my desk had gone cold. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to understand how love could be translated into legal jargon. Somewhere between the lines, the word daughter had disappeared. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft tap of my fingers against the desk, counting seconds, counting breaths, trying not to fall apart. When I finally looked at myself reflected in the dark screen, I didn't see anger yet, just disbelief, that hollow kind of shock that doesn't even know how to scream. I whispered it out loud, as if saying it would make it real. "They're suing me." I don't remember how long I sat there after reading the email. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. The daylight shifted across the walls until it turned gold, then gray. At some point, my hand stopped shaking long enough for me to open another tab, to type the words, "Civil Attorney Austin." The search results blurred together. I didn't know where to start. All I knew was that I couldn't face them alone. That night, I printed every page of the complaint and slid it into a folder labeled Hartwell. It wasn't courage, not yet. It was survival dressed up as paperwork. After a moment of thought, I picked up the phone. Not to call my parents. I called Sophie. She answered on the second ring, her voice still half asleep. Talia? What's wrong? I tried to explain, but the words broke apart. All I could manage was, they filed something. Against me. There was a pause, the kind that carries both anger and pity. I know someone, she said finally. Her name's Danielle Hartwell. She's an attorney. Sharp, fair, and impossible to intimidate. I'll text you her info. An hour later, a message popped up. Danielle Hartwell, family and civil litigation. Trust me, call her. I didn't have the strength to call, but I sent an email. Short, shaky, attached the notice I'd received. By nightfall, she had replied, "Come in tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. We'll talk." The next morning, I drove downtown and parked across from a brick building with frosted glass that read, Hartwell Logistics Group, Legal Annex. Inside, the air smelled like paper and coffee. A receptionist led me to a quiet conference room where a woman in a navy suit stood to greet me, hands steady, eyes kind. "I'm Danielle Hartwell," she said. "You must be Talia." For a second, I could only nod. Hearing my name like that, without judgment, felt strange. Danielle waited, not rushing me. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded smaller than it did in my head. "They're suing me. My parents." She didn't flinch. "I've read the complaint. Implied contract of parental reimbursement." She sat, opened a legal pad, and slid a pen across the table toward me. "First things first. You did nothing wrong by buying your home. Parenting isn't a loan." She let the line breathe. "Now let's build your record. For the next hour, I unpacked my life onto the table. Pay stubs, bank statements, tax returns, the deed, the closing disclosure, the mortgage statement showing $1,800 due each month. I handed her a spreadsheet I had made years ago out of habit. Every bill I'd paid, every dollar I'd saved, color-coded by year. Danielle's mouth tugged into a half smile. "You're my favorite kind of client," she said softly. "The organized kind." She asked for names of people who knew my history. I wrote them down. Martin Lopez, my former grocery manager who watched me work double shifts at 16. Karen Bennett, my current supervisor who could speak to my reliability. Sophie Grant, the friend who had watched me carry this life alone for years. "We'll get written statements," Danielle said, already drafting emails. "And we'll request your academic records from Lone Star Community College. Keep every receipt, every message." Then she flipped to a new page. Now the contrast. "What have your parents provided to your sister after she turned 18? I showed her a second spreadsheet. Larger, heavier. Tuition payments to Austin State University. 3 starts, 3 withdrawals, totaling $150,000. Credit card bailouts, $50,000. Total support, $200,000, I said quietly. Support to me after 18, $800. Danielle underlined the numbers. "Good. Facts are quiet, but they carry." She looked up. "We'll file an answer. We'll attach exhibits, your records, their public posts, anything that shows a pattern of favoritism and your financial independence. I'll also move to dismiss on the law, but even if this goes to a hearing, we win by being undeniable." For the first time that day, something in my chest loosened. What if they make up stories? "They don't have to make up anything," she said, unblinking. "They already put their story in writing. That's the beauty and the curse of court. What they claim to be love is now evidence." She slid the pen back toward me. "One more thing. I need your timeline, 15 to now. Jobs, schools, addresses, dates as close as you can get them." I started writing. Fast food counters at 15, grocery aisles at 16, Lone Star classes between shifts, Hartwell Logistics Group full-time, Silver Canyon Estates, keys in my palm. As the line of ink grew longer, the room felt steadier. When we finished, Danielle gathered the folders and stacked them with a precision that felt like a promise. "Go home," she said. "Eat something, sleep. I'll take it from here. She stood, then paused. And Talia? Yes? You're not selfish, she said. You're prepared. For the next few days, my life turned into a quiet investigation. At work, I finished shipments, signed forms, smiled at clients, all while a new kind of awareness followed me like a second pulse. I was being watched now, not by my parents, but by a system that demanded proof of who I'd always been. That weekend, I drove to my old grocery store on the east side. The walls still smelled faintly of detergent and cheap coffee. Martin Lopez, my former manager, was stocking shelves when he saw me. "Talia Miller," he said, eyes lighting up. "Haven't seen you in forever." I told him everything. The lawsuit, the accusation, the years of silence that had turned into paperwork. He shook his head, muttering something in Spanish that sounded half prayer, half disbelief. Then he put a hand on my shoulder. "You worked 2 jobs while your friends were still figuring out how to show up on time," he said. "If they can't see that, the judge will." From there, I met Karen Bennett at a diner off I-35. She slid into the booth with her usual calm, eyes scanning my face before I said a word. "I read your message," she said. "Tell me what you need." Her statement came the next morning, typed and notarized. Ms. Miller has never once requested financial assistance from her parents during her tenure at Hartwell Logistics Group. Reading those lines felt like seeing myself from outside, competent, steady, real. Every night, I stacked folders on my kitchen table, bills, statements, emails, photos. The pile grew into something that looked less like a burden and more like a shield. Sophie stopped by with takeout, helping me organize. "This isn't just evidence," she said, sliding a receipt into a binder. "It's proof you survived them." Her words sank deep, because for the first time, I realized she was right. This wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming the story. By Sunday, my kitchen looked like a war room, folders labeled by year, sticky notes along the wall. Danielle's voice echoed through my phone, calm, precise. "We're filing Monday. Be ready. They'll push, they'll spin, but remember, truth doesn't panic." After the call ended, I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street of Silver Canyon Estates. The lamplight spilled across the pavement, warm and still. I whispered it to myself, not a plea this time, but a promise. They won't break me again. Have you ever reached that moment, when you realize no one's coming to save you, and you have to save yourself? If you've been there, just breathe with me for a second. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is right now. Because in the next part, everything I'd buried for years will be dragged into the light, and the people who once called me ungrateful will finally face the truth. And now, let's go back to that morning. The morning of the hearing felt like stepping into someone else's dream. One of those slow, color-drained dreams where everything sounds too loud. The clock read 8:12 a.m. when I parked outside Travis County Civil Court. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat wasn't. The courthouse was made of stone and glass, tall and expressionless. Inside, the air was cold enough to make my breath visible. The walls hummed with whispers, the sound of papers, heels, pens, nerves. I found Danielle Hartwell near the elevators, calm in a navy coat, hair pinned back like she'd never once lost a case. She handed me a folder. "Everything's in order," she said quietly. "Just remember, silence is strategy. Let them talk." We walked into courtroom 3B. My parents were already there. Mom sat perfectly straight in a beige suit, her hair immaculate. Dad adjusted his tie, whispering something to their attorney, a tall man with silver cufflinks and a voice that carried. Brianna sat behind them, scrolling on her phone, pretending not to notice me. For a second, I felt 16 again, waiting for a teacher to call my name. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge's bench stood high at the far end, under a state seal carved into oak. When Judge Marianne Coleman entered, everyone rose. Her presence filled the room, calm, composed, authoritative in a way that made silence feel like gravity. The plaintiff's attorney began. Your Honor, he said smoothly, my clients devoted 2 decades to the upbringing of their daughter, Ms. Talia Miller, under the reasonable expectation that such lifelong support would be reciprocated. They seek fair compensation for 20 years of expenses and care. The words hit like static. I watched his mouth move, listing grocery bills from 2006, summer camps, medical checkups, things I barely remembered. Danielle didn't interrupt. She just took notes, her pen a soft, rhythmic metronome against the paper. Then it was our turn. Danielle rose. Her voice was even, deliberate, with that steady conviction that doesn't demand attention, it earns it. Your Honor, parenting is not a contractual service. It is a moral duty, not a debt to collect. The defendant's entire adulthood has been defined by self-reliance. She opened the first binder and laid it flat. We have bank statements, employment records, witness declarations, and tax filings showing Ms. Miller's independence since the age of 15. She turned a page, the sound crisp in the still air. Additionally, we have detailed documentation of financial favoritism toward the plaintiff's other daughter, Ms. Brianna Miller-Reed, totaling $200,000 post-majority. By contrast, support provided to the defendant after 18 amounts to $800, a sum insufficient even to suggest dependency. Judge Coleman leaned forward slightly, expression unreadable. The plaintiff's attorney shifted, tapping his pen twice before forcing a smile. These numbers, he said, don't reflect emotional labor, the intangible sacrifices parents make. Danielle didn't miss a beat. Emotional labor, Your Honor, is love. It is not litigation. The line landed like thunder, quiet, contained, and final. Across the aisle, Mom's face tightened. Dad's jaw flexed. Brianna stopped scrolling. For the first time since the lawsuit began, the room felt tilted, not in their favor anymore. When the judge adjourned for lunch, Danielle leaned toward me. How are you holding up? I exhaled. Still standing. She smiled faintly. Good. That's the first rule in court. Don't fall apart where they can see it. We stepped into the hallway, the noise of the courthouse swallowing us whole, footsteps, phones, doors. Somewhere behind us, my parents were still talking to their lawyer, voices low but urgent. I didn't turn around. For the first time, I didn't need to. After lunch, the courtroom felt smaller. Maybe it was the light, sharper now, sliding through the high windows like thin blades. Or maybe it was because I finally understood what was happening. This wasn't about debt, it was about control. Danielle straightened her notes and rose. Your Honor, the defense calls Mr. Martin Lopez. Martin walked to the stand, shoulders square in a shirt that looked freshly ironed. He took the oath, voice steady, the same calm tone he used when managing teenagers and grocery chaos. Mr. Lopez, Danielle began, how long have you known Miss Miller? He smiled faintly. Since she was 15. She worked double shifts, school mornings, stockroom nights. I remember telling her to take a day off once. She said, can't, rent's due. I didn't know any 15-year-old who said that. A low murmur rippled through the room. Did you ever meet her parents during that time? Danielle asked. He hesitated. Once. They dropped her off late one night. Drove off before she could grab her bag. Danielle nodded, letting the silence hang just long enough to let the truth breathe. Thank you, Mr. Lopez. No further questions. Next was Karen Bennett. Her posture was precise, her words crisp, the embodiment of reliability. Ms. Miller, Danielle said, can you confirm your employee's financial independence? Karen adjusted her glasses. Yes, absolutely. She's never requested loans or parental assistance. She manages her department budget with the same discipline she manages her life, meticulously. The plaintiff's attorney leaned forward. You're her friend, are you not? Karen smiled politely. I'm her supervisor. Friendship came later, earned by watching her do the work. Then came Sophie Grant. She stepped up in a simple navy dress, clutching a folder to her chest. When she raised her hand to be sworn in, her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. Ms. Grant, Danielle said gently, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? She's my best friend, Sophie said. "We met 8 years ago at Hartwell Logistics. I've watched her pay off every debt she ever had, alone. When her family refused to help, she just worked harder." She glanced at me briefly, eyes wet but unwavering. "They didn't raise her. They limited her. And she built herself anyway." A hush spread across the courtroom, that heavy stillness that follows truth when it lands too hard to deny. The plaintiff's attorney stood. "Ms. Grant, are you implying that her parents were negligent?" Sophie met his gaze. "I'm implying they forgot what love was supposed to look like." When she stepped down, even the clerk looked shaken. Danielle gathered her notes. "Your Honor," she said, "the defense moves to admit Exhibits D through K, tax filings, bank statements, and witness declarations, as evidence of long-term financial independence and parental favoritism toward Ms. Brianna Miller-Reed." Judge Coleman reviewed the papers, expression calm but eyes sharp. "Admitted," she said. The gavel echoed softly. Then came the slideshow, a quiet sequence Danielle had prepared. Screens lit up with scans of checks made out to Brianna, tuition, car payments, credit cards, shopping sprees, receipts marked urgent and family matter. Each click of the remote sounded like another truth leaving its hiding place. When the last image faded, Danielle turned toward the plaintiff's table. "Would you like to clarify, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, which of these payments were for your elder daughter?" Neither of them answered. Mom stared down at her folded hands. Dad's jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't swallow. Brianna fidgeted, whispering something under her breath. Danielle faced the judge. "The defense rests for today, Your Honor. All evidence and witness statements have been submitted." Judge Coleman nodded. "We'll reconvene tomorrow for closing remarks." The sound of her gavel was soft but final, like punctuation at the end of a long sentence no one wanted to read aloud. When we stepped out of the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter, airier somehow. Danielle tucked her notes into her briefcase and looked at me. "You held your ground," she said. I nodded, still hearing Sophie's words echo in my mind. They didn't raise her. They limited her. For years I thought silence meant peace. But as I walked toward the courthouse doors, I realized sometimes silence just waits for truth to arrive. The next morning, the courthouse looked different. Maybe it was the light, softer this time, or maybe it was me. For the first time since this began, I wasn't walking into a fight. I was walking into the truth. Courtroom 3B was already half full when I entered. My parents sat at the same table, their lawyer flipping through papers with the kind of desperation that pretends to be confidence. Brianna wasn't there. Her empty chair said enough. Danielle leaned toward me as we sat. "Whatever happens, you've already won," she whispered. I nodded, eyes on the judge's bench. I wasn't thinking about victory. I was thinking about closure. When Judge Coleman entered, the room fell into silence. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone carried authority. She adjusted her glasses, glanced over both tables, and began. "I've reviewed all exhibits and testimony presented to this court," she said. "What stands before me is not a matter of contract or reimbursement. It is a matter of misplaced expectation, the attempt to redefine parenting as a financial transaction." The words hung in the air like glass, sharp, reflective, impossible to touch. The law does not recognize an implied contract between parents and children. Support given to a minor is a duty, not a debt. To seek repayment is to misunderstand the very foundation of family. I saw my mother's eyes lower, my father's jaw tighten. Judge Coleman continued, her tone neither cruel nor kind, just final. "The plaintiff's claim is hereby dismissed, with prejudice. Furthermore, this court orders the plaintiffs to pay the defendant's legal fees in the amount of $10,000. A collective murmur moved through the room, a soft exhale from strangers who didn't know me, but seemed to understand. But the judge wasn't done. She looked directly at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she said, "I have presided over hundreds of civil disputes. Some involve money, others power.
But rarely have I seen a case where the plaintiff's motivations were so clearly rooted in pride rather than justice. Her voice was calm, each word deliberate. Parenting is not a ledger, and love, when turned into leverage, ceases to be love at all. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound could have been. Mom's mascara trembled under her lashes. Dad's pen rolled off the table and hit the floor. No one moved to pick it up. Judge Coleman signed the final page, handed it to the clerk, and looked back at me. "Ms. Miller," she said softly, "you may not realize it now, but this case will follow others, not because of the verdict, but because of your courage to stand alone when others tried to shame you into silence. You've reminded this court what dignity looks like." I wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in my throat. I simply nodded. The gavel came down one last time. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt like the end of a long, stormy season. A door finally closing against the wind. As the courtroom emptied, my parents lingered near the aisle. Mom clutched her purse with both hands, eyes red but dry. "Talia," she said, voice small, almost fragile. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." For a moment, I saw the woman who used to braid my hair before school, the one who once sang off-key in the car, but the memory dissolved as quickly as it came. "I know," I said quietly. "But you did." Dad stepped forward, trying to speak, but Danielle appeared beside me, her hand a gentle barrier. "Ms. Miller has nothing further to discuss," she said firmly. "Please respect that." Mom looked like she wanted to say more, but the bailiff opened the door, and sunlight spilled in, bright and unfiltered. I turned and walked toward it. Outside, the sky was impossibly blue, the kind of blue that almost hurt to look at after too many gray days. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing in air that felt brand new. People brushed past, their voices blending into something distant and harmless. Danielle joined me a minute later, briefcase in hand. "How does it feel?" she asked. I looked at her, then at the world beyond the courthouse gate. "Like I can finally breathe without asking permission," she smiled. "That's what freedom usually sounds like." We stood there for a while, neither of us speaking. Down the steps, reporters were already gathering, their cameras glinting in the sun, but Danielle waved them off. "Not today," she said. "She doesn't owe anyone a story." I watched them fade into the background, and for the first time, the silence around me didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. When I finally walked away, my reflection followed me in the courthouse windows. Not the girl who used to beg for approval, but the woman who had just written her own ending. The sun was already low when I turned into Silver Canyon Estates. The world looked softer that day, the kind of quiet you can only earn after surviving too much noise. The oak trees along the road were bare, their shadows long and patient across the pavement. My house waited at the end of the cul-de-sac, its yellow paint catching the last of the light like a kept promise. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a while, listening to the tick of the cooling metal. The silence felt different now, not empty, but deliberate, as if the air itself was deciding what stayed and what could finally leave. When I stepped inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and paper, remnants of late nights spent preparing evidence, fighting ghosts. The folders still sat stacked on the kitchen table, neat, precise, unnecessary now. I ran my fingers along their edges before closing the top one. "It's over," I whispered. The words didn't echo. They settled, gentle and final. I made tea, sat by the window, and watched the sun dip behind the roofs. Across the street, porch lights flickered on. Ordinary life, continuing like nothing had happened. For a long time, I envied that kind of normal. Tonight, it just looked beautiful. My phone buzzed once, a message from Danielle. "Court documents filed, case officially closed, rest easy." I typed back, "Thank you, for everything." She replied with a single line. "Go live your peace, Talia." I stared at those words until the screen dimmed. Go live your peace. For years, peace had felt like a door locked from the inside. Now it was open, not dramatic, not loud, just open. That night, I didn't dream of the courtroom or my parents' faces. I dreamed of light, not blinding, just steady, falling across stacks of paper, then dissolving into quiet. The next morning, I woke early, sunlight painting thin lines across the wall. The air was cool, still. I walked barefoot into the kitchen and opened the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking. Someone mowing a lawn, a dog barking, the mail truck humming down the street. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the need to rush. I brewed coffee, toasted bread, and sat at the table without my laptop or phone. The steam rose in slow spirals, soft against the morning light. My reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, older, calmer, lighter somehow. I traced the faint scar near my wrist, the one from years ago when I sliced my hand unpacking boxes after moving in. Back then, it had stung for weeks. Now it was barely visible. A reminder that even wounds remember how to close. On the counter, a small envelope waited, Danielle's business card tucked inside, with a handwritten note beneath it. You're stronger than you think. Stay that way. I smiled, folded it carefully, and slid it into a drawer. Some reminders deserve to be kept close. Later, as I stepped onto the porch, a breeze moved through the trees. Light, unhurried. The air smelled faintly of cedar and morning rain. Down the street, a child's laughter rang out, followed by the sharp bark of a dog. I stood there for a long time, breathing it all in. The world hadn't changed, but I had. The woman who once begged for approval was gone. The one who remained understood something quieter, simpler. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the refusal to let it define you. Inside, the kettle whistled softly. I went back in, closed the door behind me, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was shutting anyone out, only keeping my peace in. The following weeks unfolded like quiet pages, soft, slow, deliberate. Days no longer rushed past me. They simply arrived, stayed for a while, and left without taking pieces of me with them. I started with the house. The roof leaked near the back porch, and one of the window frames had splintered during the last storm. On Saturdays, I'd change into old jeans, tie my hair up, and work until sunset. The rhythm of repair felt like breathing. Sandpaper, nails, paint, repeat. By the second weekend, the walls gleamed in fresh white, and the floors smelled faintly of cedar oil and second chances. Sophie stopped by most Sundays with iced tea and a smile that reached her eyes. You look lighter, she said once, leaning against the doorway, watching me repaint the trim. I think I am, I answered. Maybe peace isn't something that happens all at once. Maybe it's built like this. She nodded. One nail at a time. It was Sophie who told me about the adoption fair at the Austin Rescue Shelter. You should come, she said. They have a few senior dogs who need quiet homes. Sounds like a match made in heaven. I went that Saturday, more curious than ready. The shelter smelled of shampoo, straw, and hope. Dozens of eyes looked up from behind metal gates, cautious, searching. And then there was Rusty. He was older, with a patch of white across his muzzle and one ear that refused to stand straight. When I crouched near his kennel, he tilted his head, studying me like someone trying to remember a face. I read the tag. Mixed breed, 8 years old, found abandoned near Highway 71. When the volunteer opened the gate, Rusty walked out slowly, sniffed my hand, and rested his chin on my knee. That was it. No hesitation, no noise, just quiet recognition. I signed the papers an hour later. The first night home, he paced the hallway, unsure of where to settle. I spread a blanket near the couch, sat beside him, and waited. After a while, he sighed, that deep, human kind of sigh, and lowered his head onto the floor. I reached out, scratching behind his ear. We're safe, I whispered. Over the next weeks, he followed me everywhere, to the kitchen, the garden, even to the porch when I drank my morning coffee. He'd watch the street, ears twitching at every passing car, as if guarding the quiet we'd both found. In the evenings, I'd light a candle and write in a notebook, thoughts that weren't about pain anymore, but about balance. Words like boundaries, kindness, freedom filled the pages. I realized healing wasn't dramatic. It was domestic. Dishes drying by the sink, a dog snoring on the rug, light moving gently across the room. Sometimes when I watered the plants or folded laundry, I'd catch myself humming, an old habit I'd forgotten I had. And in those small, ordinary sounds, I heard life returning. By mid-spring, the garden bloomed. I planted lavender along the fence and rosemary by the kitchen window. Rusty would roll in the grass, tail sweeping arcs in the air. I'd laugh, the kind of laughter that doesn't echo. It just lives quietly where it belongs. One evening, as the sky turned honey-colored, Emily, my cousin from Houston, arrived for a visit. We hadn't spoken much since the trial. She hugged me tightly, longer than expected. "I saw the court transcript," she said. "You were braver than I ever could have been." I smiled. "You'd be surprised what you can survive." We spent hours talking, not about the past, but about recipes, movies, the little things we used to love before family turned into a battlefield. Before she left, she patted Rusty's head. "He's lucky," she said. I looked at Rusty, curled on the porch steps, eyes half closed in the breeze. "So am I." That night, as the crickets started their slow chorus, I stood by the doorway, watching the porch lights flicker down the street. The world was quiet again, not because nothing was happening, but because everything finally made sense. Healing, I realized, wasn't about erasing the storm. It was learning how to live where the sunlight still falls after it passes. 6 months passed like water, steady, reflective, alive. The heat of summer had softened into September light, and the lavender in my yard had faded from violet to gray-green. Life had found its rhythm again. Morning walks with Rusty, afternoons at work, evenings spent reading by the porch window. One quiet Sunday, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank page. I hadn't planned to write anything, but the cursor blinked like a heartbeat waiting to be claimed. At the top, I typed the words, "Boundaries as Self-Love." The title felt strange at first, too simple, too true. I started writing anyway, about growing up in a house where love was conditional, about the price of silence, about how saying no had saved my life. I wrote that boundaries weren't walls, but bridges, letting light in without letting harm through. Hours passed without my noticing. When I finally hit publish, I didn't expect anyone to read it. But that night, my inbox filled with messages, strangers sharing their own stories of guilt, distance, and courage. One wrote, "Your story made me call my mother just to say I love her, but I also need space." Another said, "Thank you for showing me that peace can exist after disappointment." I cried, not from sadness, but from recognition. Every piece of pain I'd carried had become something lighter, something useful. A few weeks later, a small envelope arrived in the mail, marked with the Travis County Court seal. My heart tightened, old reflex, but when I opened it, I found a handwritten note. "Dear Ms. Miller, cases like yours remind us why justice must have a heart. You carried yourself with grace and truth when anger would have been easier. You showed this court that dignity doesn't need to shout to be heard. Judge Marianne Coleman." I read it twice, then pressed the paper to my chest. It wasn't about the verdict anymore. It was about being seen, fully, finally. Later that week, I found another envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my mother's handwriting. Inside was a short note. "We were wrong. I'm sorry. I hope you find happiness, even if it's without us." I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. There was no anger left, just a quiet ache, and something softer beneath it.
That night, I lit a candle by the window and whispered into the still air, "I forgive you." Not for them, for me. Because forgiveness wasn't about reopening the door, it was about no longer standing outside it. That night, I sat on the porch with Rusty asleep at my feet. The sky was turning the color of amber tea, that fragile moment between day and dusk. Fireflies drifted over the grass like slow-moving stars. I opened my notebook, the same one I'd used during the trial, and wrote 3 simple lines. Truth doesn't punish, it frees. Boundaries don't divide, they protect. And peace, real peace, doesn't need witnesses. I closed the book and let the air settle around me. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's wind chime caught the breeze, scattering silver notes into the evening. From where I sat, I could see the reflection of the sunset in the kitchen window, gold light folding across the glass, soft and forgiving. For a second, it looked like the same window I'd once cried beside after my parents left. But it wasn't. The house hadn't changed. The woman inside it had. Inside, the kettle began to hum. Rusty lifted his head, one ear twitching, then settled again. I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the day ease off my shoulders. As I stepped inside, the last light of the evening spilled across the floor. Pale gold, quiet, endless. I paused in the doorway and whispered, almost to myself, "This is what freedom looks like." Then I smiled, turned off the porch light, and closed the door. Not to keep the world out, but to keep the light in. If this story touched you, stay a little longer. Hit the like button, subscribe, or just leave a small "I'm here" in the comments with your city and time. Because somewhere out there, someone might need this reminder tonight. Peace is still possible.